I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Oddman Out. Get Forbidden Knowledge News every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 12:15 p.m. Central Time on clearair.fm. That's clearair.fm. We got some great upcoming guests, Dr. Lisa Coach, L.A. Marzulli, Leo Zagami, and more. Be sure and look out for those episodes. Check out my films. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime. We are booking guests for May. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Oddman Out. He hosts the Oddman Out podcast, which covers hidden history, deep parapolitics, occult deconstruction, economics, Christianity, and philosophy from a rabbit hole aficionado's perspective. Oddman, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. We're going to be taking a deep dive into some dangerous hidden history. We're going to discuss the podcast presentation series you've done called Those We Don't Speak Of. It covers a dark history of Zionism, Talmudic beliefs, and Kabbalah, and how these occult ideologies have been woven into our modern systems of control. With the fire hose of information that we've been flooded with over the past few years, it's become more apparent that there are a very powerful group of extremists and psychopaths that have infiltrated almost all aspects of politics, government, corporate interests, and the media. So you've done some great work exploring the hidden history surrounding this. Before we get into it, though, this is your first time on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and let the audience know how they can find more.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me. I just took an interest in politics right after 9/11, like a lot of people, and I started talking about it online, even on MySpace, even back in those days, the glorious days of MySpace. And, I just talked about it and blogged and did those kinds of things for a long time. But for whatever reason, in 2019, I felt led to do a podcast, and several people urged me, hey, your posts and your blogs, they really don't tell the whole story. You need to do a podcast so you can talk in long form. And so I tried it, and I've been doing one ever since. So,
like I said, I really enjoy the work you're doing. Before we get into the information that you wanted to present tonight, how do you feel about where we're at with current events such as Epstein file release, some of the high impact events that have led to certain understandings that society has right now?
Well, I've got mixed feelings, it's become kind of the thing to criticize the Zionists now.
Yeah.
And when I started doing it, hardly anybody was doing it. And I'm not tooting my own horn, because there were some people out there, but it was still taboo. You were labeled, anti-Semitic or a really bad person, even if you were talking about legitimate things. And now, you can go on any social media site and see it. And some people have said to me, well, now that it's out there and it's going mainstream, it can't be the problem that we're being led to believe it is. And so I understand that, because we've kind of seen that with other things, but so much has been hidden, and I'm still learning stuff, and I'm 27 episodes in. I started doing the podcast series in 2022, and I just keep learning new stuff. So, going back to biblical times, then post-biblical times on up to the modern era, a lot has been hidden. And I think that's due to the language language barriers, different languages and cultures. And frankly, a lot of people who speak English and don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish or can't read Aramaic, they don't know a lot of the things that have been written and have been said and taught. So I think that a lot of people are starting to learn this stuff little by little. And it seems to me, this is the big thing that I've kind of come to believe is, yeah, there are other people out there. There are other groups out there trying to, they want to be the leaders of the world. They want to rule the world, the old, that passion to rule the world. But this particular belief system is kind of set up in their religion to rule the world. And I think, again, a lot of people don't realize the changes that happened to Judaism post Second Temple, which it morphed into rabbinic Judaism, because before that, everything revolved around the temple. And so they had to adapt and change a lot of things to, kind of carry on. And there's been so many changes just ever since that. But another thing I want to say is also a lot of people don't realize that when you read in the Bible about different times that the Hebrews would worship these other gods, I just assumed, maybe it was like one of these kind of, there's a few people who go astray, and it lasts for a few months or whatever. No, it at certain times, it lasted for decades, even centuries. So you think about Solomon actually creating this, I believe it was Baal or Moloch. I can't remember now. It's been a long time since I've actually studied this particular part of it, but he had a shrine to one of the gods there, but that was just one, there were many more. And so I think that people don't realize that a lot of the cultures that they came into contact with, even back with the Canaanites and all the others, it rubbed off on them, and they took some of that and continued to build upon it and build upon it. Even, you get a few, a couple thousand years later, and it's the Romans, or a few more thousand years actually. But, the Hellenistic period, their time, actually, this is relevant to today, their time in Persia, which was Babylon, I think, at the time, they were very much influenced by Zoroastrianism in certain ways, especially when it comes to their beliefs in demons and angels. And they took some of the names from the Zoroastrian belief system and kind of developed the angel names that you read, mostly not in the Bible, but the post-biblical texts. And there's so many of those. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. You could never really know all of the writings, because the commentaries and things have just continued to be written even into the modern period.
There's so many layers to peel through when trying to understand this history. Before we get too far into the history of Zionism, with what is unfolding now, do you think that there is an attempt by these groups to, in a sense, manifest prophecy?
Yes, I do. And I believe it's twofold. You have these prophecies that they've written in the medieval period, and some say a little bit before that, like in the Zohar. But then you have biblical prophecies. And I think that a lot of these charlatan pastors are pushing these biblical prophecies. Some have already happened, and they are trying to make people, I think they're trying to make them scared, for one, which makes them easily controllable. But two, they're kind of pushing that, well, just sit back. This is all prophecy. You can't do anything about it. Don't change anything about your life, And I've been telling people, look, man, for all of my life that I can remember, anything that happened in the Middle East, especially if it was concerning modern Israel, there's just a section of these pastors, especially the dispensational Protestants, who will say it's prophetic, no matter what it is. It doesn't matter. And so that has made their audiences and their churches, their church members, they don't even bother to think about things or look deeply into the details of what's going on in the Middle East, or what our government is doing, or what the Israeli government is doing and has done. They just assume that it's biblical prophecy. So I think that's very dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. And we'll probably get more into that a little later on. Where should we start when we're trying to look at the modern history of the Zionist control system?
Well, I would say you kind of start with the beginnings of what would become modern Israel, which was Palestine at the time. And at the time, there was a very small amount of Jews and a small amount of Christians. It was something like 10%, 12% Christians. And I think it was an even smaller amount of Jews, if I'm not mistaken, but around that same percentage lived in Palestine in the 1800s. And the rest were Arabs. And so, a lot of people don't realize that, but starting about 1880, one of the Rothschild family, the banking family, and this is not one of those far-fetched conspiracies. This is easy to look up. Yeah. Edmond de Rothschild was one of the French Rothschilds. As a lot of people will know, I believe it was Mayor Amschel. He sent his sons. I think he had several sons, more than a handful, I think, and he sent them all to different places to continue the banking family in these different areas of the world. And so this was one of the French ones. And so Edmond de Rothschild started buying land in Israel. And like I said, it was Palestine at the time. A lot of this was farmland and agricultural lands being worked like by tenant farmers, Arabic tenant farmers who would, they would kind of grow the crops and take care of the land and whatnot for a price. And so he started buying that up. And at first, he was keeping the Arab farmers, and that didn't last too long, because once people started migrating in there, other Jews, they wanted to get rid of them. And they wanted to do that type of work and kind of replace them. But he and his son started it was called at the time the Palestine-Israel Colonial Association. And we're not supposed to say colonialism because you're anti-Semitic if you say that, but right there it is in the organization that they created to develop the land there. And so that was really the first, they created the first issue, the first kind of little village, and they started building from there, and so you forward a few decades later, and you have the father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, who was a playwright and a secular playwright. He wasn't a religious Jew. And most early Zionists were not religious Jews at the time. And in fact, I should probably throw this in. A lot of them were actually socialists and communists. They came from Europe, and that was what was popular at the time there. And so these are the people who, basically founded Israel. And so Theodor Herzl came up with the idea to move a lot of people back to Palestine. And he wrote a pamphlet called Der Judenstaat. I think that's the Jewish state, I believe. And that was actually originally addressed to the Rothschilds. I think it was called A Letter to Rothschild. So it was his plea to help them do that and basically fund that whole thing. And so the Rothschilds have been intimately connected to the modern state from the beginning, and even into the modern era. They have paid for the Knesset, the memorial gardens, where their Supreme Court is, just so many different things. They have I guess you call it like it would be like an equivalent to our tax exempt groups here, an NGO, and it's called the Hannah Adiv, I believe. And so they do a lot of work for the Rothschilds in Israel. And there is even a Rothschilds Boulevard there in Tel Aviv. So I think a lot of people aren't familiar with that part of the history there. And when it first started, the Zionist movement, you had kind of two different groups. You had people like Menachem Begin, who was actually one of the members, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but he was a member of one of these, actually it was a terrorist group. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, but you had people like Menachem Begin, and then you had another group of people who were called the reform Zionists, or revisionist Zionists. And that was people like Zeev Jabotinsky. He kind of led that movement. And he was more about he had a fascination with fascism. He actually kind of looked up to certain fascists, and Mussolini was the guy that he kind of admired, and actually took some of his troops, believe it or not, to one of Mussolini's bases, and they trained there, and people would call him the Jewish Mussolini. And so that's kind of an interesting connection there. But he was more about taking what they wanted by force, where you had the other group, they wanted to do it diplomatically and kind of do it through political means and kind of talk to people and, sway people. And so he said, no, we're going to do it by force. We're going to just do what we want. And so his side won out, and they actually created the Likud party, which is the party in charge now with Bibi Netanyahu. And in fact, Netanyahu's father, I think his name is Ben Zion Netanyahu, but it was originally Milikowski. That was their last name. And his father was one of the secretaries for this Zeev Jabotinsky. So Bibi has grown up in that Likud, that whole system where they were about taking things by force. And that really has become the mainstream of the Israeli government today. That's kind of, we can all see that that's kind of their philosophy. They'll do what they want to do.
You said something interesting that I've even noticed in modern times, that at the highest level, you mentioned Theodor Herzl wasn't even a religious Zionist. You also look at what's happening today with some of the players that aren't religious. Some of them are atheists. They seem to be, in a way, using the religious extremists as weapons to destroy the old system and bring about this new technocratic system that we're seeing now. But even if you go back to the beginning, at its core, it doesn't seem like it was about the religious beliefs. It was always about gaining power and control in some way.
I think that's mostly true. Now, there were some religious Jews, but for the most part, the main players were not. And actually, if you look today to all the prime ministers, if my information is correct, there's only been one religious prime minister in the whole history of modern Israel. And that was the guy who I think was before Bibi this last time. And I'm blanking on his name. I think it's Naphtali Hearst or something like that. The first name's Naphtali. And he's the one that recently has talked about they need to go after Turkey now. So no place is safe. But there has been a real secular influence there. And I think the Jewish historian Elon Pape, he has a quote. It's something like, most Zionists don't believe in God, but they do believe he gave them Palestine. So that's kind of it's a good thing to go by, because that really is true. Because I think they learn to use the biblical myths and the biblical stories to kind of work over their own people, and say, this is us. This was our land. We deserve it. We're going to take back what's ours. We're going to do what the Bible says we did to the Canaanites, to everyone else, if they won't let us have our way, and those kinds of things. And I think they realized early on that they could take the religion and use it to their benefit, even though they didn't really believe in it.
Yeah, they used their extreme beliefs to establish all the different isms: socialism, communism, Zionism. It seems to have all stemmed from these power-hungry psychopaths.
Yeah, I believe Dennis Prager is even on record on video saying that Jews created all the isms, and that doesn't necessarily mean all. They had ill intent with all of them,
right?
But it's just a thing, and that really does kind of relate to, I believe, their religion, what has become their religion, and that is in the belief in the Kabbalah. They have this belief called Tikkun Olam, which is, they believe Jews, their purpose in life is to repair the world, and so they believe that doing different things. And that could be, for some, that could be doing really good things like, helping the homeless or helping single mothers or, helping the elderly or those kinds of things. Yes, that's great. But to those power hungry people, I think that they believe if they control the world and make people do what they want them to do, that's their idea of tikkun olam. So I think that come out of Lurianic Kabbalah, which was kind of, I call it the Reformed Kabbalah, because this Rabbi Isaac Luria kind of created a whole. He didn't completely change everything, but he came up with a different system that was more applicable to the average people, and they could understand it better. And he popularized Kabbalah, I should say.
After the establishment of modern Israel, then we start seeing the rash of Zionist terror attacks, false flag high impact events that are established by the Zionists themselves in order to create these problem reaction solution issues.
Yeah, well, when the Brits took over Ottoman Palestine, you would think that the Zionists would have been extremely happy because they finally had a chance to start getting some Jews over there. But they wanted to just open the floodgates and let all the Jews over there all at once. And there were something like 700,000 Palestinians there, and then quite a few Christians as well, not anywhere near that many. But the Brits were trying to control the volume of people coming in because there just wasn't enough. I mean, there was room, but a lot of it, they would have had to have lived in the deserts, and, there was only so many, so much food and so many things that people need to live. So they were trying to control it. And trust me, I do believe that the British government, I don't think that they're faultless or anything like that. But I think that they thought probably that if they controlled the place that was home to the world's top 3 religions, that they would have a lot of power over that. And I think it kind of backfired on them. But they started letting Jews in, they were regulating it, and a lot of the Jews didn't like that. So they created terrorist organizations, really like you would have today, that most people would assume would have been created in the first place by Islam, but that's not the case. And so they started attacking the British soldiers and the British government and Arabs and things like that. You had a couple different ones. You had the Irgun and you had the Lehi. I might have gotten that mixed up. It's been a while since I looked at this. Irgun and you had the Lehi. Yeah, that's correct. And the Lehi is also sometimes called the Stern Gang after the leader, Avram Stern. And some people may be familiar with the King David Hotel bombing. And that was probably, I think that was their biggest bombing and killing. But it's interesting because today, a lot of times you'll see, especially when one of the top diplomats from America goes over there, they speak at the King David Hotel, and you'll see that podium there that says King David Hotel. And so they killed 91 people there, and they dressed up as Arabs when they went in to plant the bombs. I know there's a documentary, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a really good one. And it actually has some of the surviving members. It was several years old. And they were talking about when they went inside to plant the bombs, and they had no remorse whatsoever. I mean, none whatsoever. It's really amazing that they were doing that. And finally, after assassinations and all these bombings, the British just gave up and let them have it. And that's really, besides the vote at the UN, that's really how it all happened. And that's how the modern state was finally put together. And as pretty much as soon as the Brits pulled out, that's when a lot of these people who were part of those terrorist groups went in and started killing the Palestinians. And there's the famous Deir Yassin massacre. And that was one of the bloodiest massacres. And they actually, the documentary I was speaking about, and I'll try to look that up and maybe you can add it to the notes, but there's a couple of guys that were present and talk about that. And again, no remorse whatsoever. So, it's a really different history there than what we've been taught in school and in the movies. And so I think if people knew a lot of this stuff, they would think twice about blindly trusting the Israeli government.
There are some researchers that believe the JFK assassination was a key event that allowed Zionist infiltration within the U.S. government, at least more than in previous years. Would you agree with that?
I think that's probably true. And I can't remember his name, but you may have seen this, but there's a clip of one of JFK's one of his biographers. He's a Jewish fellow too, I believe. And he says in there, in the some of the files that he was able to look at, that he believes that Israel killed JFK because he did not want them to have nukes. And he was adamant about it. And I believe it was Menachem Begin who resigned because of that. So that's one of the big Zionist heroes there. And for him to resign, that says quite a bit. And then, next thing you know, JFK is murdered.
It is very interesting. Now, in your talking points, you have how Israel is among the top 15 richest countries in the world. On top of that, the U.S. gives them billions of dollars yearly. Talk a little bit about the implications of this.
Yeah, that's another thing that I was surprised by, because I grew up here in the South, and, we went to little Baptist churches, and it was not even a thought. You took Israel's side on everything, they could do no wrong. And, but I started getting curious about this stuff. I started looking up, well, why do we give them so much money? Why do they need so much money? Because there's so many wealthy Jews here in America. And so I started looking that up, and, I learned that they bring in about $6 billion in tourism alone, mainly probably from, I would say probably 75% Christians. I wouldn't be surprised if that was even higher.
Yeah.
But, they have a booming tech industry. And one of the things that I was really surprised about is and it depends on which year you look, but it's always up there really high. I think like a couple of years ago, they were the 7th or 8th largest arms exporter. And that just blew me away because, of course, we sell them arms, and no, not we, but, our government and the industries here, the military industrial complex industries. And they turn and sell some of these arms to other places, and some of these places, people ought to look it up themselves, that they actually sell arms to, could be considered hostile. And it's just, a lot of things don't make sense, and not only do they get something like 8 billion to 9 billion yearly from the United States, but they give them even more every year in loan guarantees. And those loan guarantees, I'm not sure if there's even proof that they always pay those loans back.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that ought to be looked at.
Talk a little bit about the influence that Zionism and the Israeli government has over United States politics. In your talking points, you have how AIPAC lobby funds both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, well, I'll start with this. I grew up after 9/11. I started paying attention to the news, and I think like a lot of people, but I didn't really even know the difference between conservative or liberal or anything like that. But eventually I took the conservative side because I was like, oh, I can't believe that these people attacked us. Why would they attack us? I believe that whole line, embarrassingly enough. But, if you listen to just regular mainstream con Inc., as I call it, you would have, everything they say, nearly, not everything, but a lot of the things they say are lies. And they will have you believe that Israel's always right. And, the Arabs and the Muslims are always the bad guys. And they paint this picture that is just not correct. Yeah. Well, all you have to do is really look and see that, these guys put the Israeli flag, a lot of our representatives, on their door beside their offices. There's no other, I've never seen another country that these guys do that with. But different people like Cynthia McKinney and others who were former reps have come out and said, yeah, you basically have to sign agreements that you will you will go along with AIPAC, the Israel lobby, and you won't go against Israel, and you won't support a boycott, those kinds of things. And they say, if you don't, you're just not going to get the money to be reelected. So that's the way they do it. And, as far as the conservative media, I know where I was going with that now, they would have you believe that liberals are all anti-Semitic and the Democrats have nothing to do with Israel. But that's just not true. If you follow AIPAC, and I've been following them now since I've been doing this series on X and other platforms, but they openly brag that they every, like, I remember, I think it was 1 term ago, not this last term, but the term before, they kept posting that every Democrat that they supported won. And so, and they'll even say progressive sometimes. And we know that the conservatives, so many of them, because they talk about it constantly, support AIPAC. So, it's like they've got everybody, and people say, well, there's other really powerful lobbies. Yes, there is, the big pharma lobby, of course, and that doesn't make them right. We should fight against them as well. But we're not going over in other countries and mass killing people for big pharma, even though big pharma is probably mass killing us here. But that's a whole nother story. But you know what I mean? The influence is unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, as we've already established, this isn't about your everyday Jewish people. This isn't about the Jewish religion. This is about a group of very powerful, psychotic white Europeans that decided to infiltrate all aspects of politics and corporate interests and education and all of the systems that control humanity. You also hear about how in our modern era, they are trying to globally establish Noahide laws.
100%. And yeah, you're definitely right. It's certainly not all Jews. And I try to tell people that, look, a lot of the propaganda that's out there is to keep Jews loyal to this cause. And because, if they really delved into things, they wouldn't support a lot of this stuff themselves. But as long as they're scared and think the world's out to get them, then they're going to support whatever. A lot of them, not all of them. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, it's very interesting because it's not all Jews, but these very powerful people, they do want to control everything, and they can use the religion and they can use the fear to get what they want. And most people go along with it because it's like, every 2 years, we get a big blockbuster WW2 themed movie, or usually a couple of New York Times bestsellers every year, about World War II. My kids, they all came out of high school not knowing anything about the Bolshevik Revolution or World War I or any of this other stuff, but they know everything about World War II. They know everything that, obviously the education system wants them to. So that's, there's a bit of brainwashing there for sure. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that, hey, there's a lot of these other important historic events that have happened that really need to be looked into. And I think that's a good thing.
I think they're using the anti-Semitic card, like you said, the World War II propaganda, the Holocaust propaganda, all being used so that they can then bait the rest of society into going along with the establishment of Noahide laws. The anti-Semitic card has been such a powerful weapon in recent years. I think that they still have plenty of leeway to use that for control methods in the future as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have this working definition of anti-Semitism now. And if you read that, and I've read most of it, it's pretty much any kind of criticism of the Israeli government would also be considered anti-Semitic. And back to the Noahides. So the group that pushes the Noahides the most, the hardest, is the Chabad group, the Chabad Lubavitch. And if people are not familiar, anytime you see the president or some leader of another country, or sometimes it'll be somebody like Greg Abbott from Texas, the governor, surrounded by these guys in black clothes and black hats, almost like old school mafia hats, fedoras. That's the Chabad Mafia, as I call them. And they actually get their name. It's a mixture of three of the Sephardic branches on the Kabbalah tree, the tree of life. So that's kind of interesting. But Jared Kushner is, he goes to a Chabad Lubavitch synagogue. People like Dershowitz, that scumbag lawyer. I think that also, I don't think Ben Shapiro is Chabad Lubavitch member, but I've been seeing him with different ones. And when Trump went to the grave of that rabbi a few months ago, that was the seventh Rebbe of Chabad Lubavitch, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And the night before Trump was elected the first time, Jared and Ivanka went to his grave and prayed. And
wow.
Some believe that this rabbi, the Rebbe, was the Messiah himself, and he's actually coming back. He's being his soul's being transmigrated into another being, and so it's really weird stuff. But they are really big pushers of the Noahide laws, and President H.W. Bush, and I think maybe even Reagan before him, but definitely H.W. Bush, they set up these it's an education day where they honor the rabbi, and it mentions the Noahide laws, but it doesn't, it's not a law. It's not a law yet. And a lot of people will look at the 7 Noahide laws and think, oh, there's nothing wrong. It sounds a lot like the 10 Commandments. But there's one in particular that I think a lot of Americans might have a problem with, and that is the one about idolatry. It calls for capital punishment when you break these laws.
Right.
And idolatry, they consider the Trinity idolatry. And I have the book on the Noahide laws. It's called the Divine Code, I believe. And it's like an 800 and some odd page book. And it says plainly in there, yes, the Trinity is idolatry. And it kind of like sugarcoats the capital punishment, but you can look up even on like the Jewish Virtual Library and stuff like that and find out that has been, since they started pushing that, the Noahide laws, and I think they came up with that in the Talmud. It was capital punishment. That's what called for when you broke one. So pretty open and honest in that book about these things. And it also says, and I've seen a couple of rabbis on videos say this, and I think this would also surprise a lot of people, that the Muslims, they actually serve the same God as the Jews, but they don't honor the 613 mitzvahs, the laws, and that's the problem they have with them. But when it comes to the Christians, they're idolaters, and Jews are not even supposed to go inside a church because of that. So people ought to be aware of some of this stuff.
You also have in your talking points, which doesn't surprise me at all, that Israel is the top exporter of arms.
Yeah, that's something that really surprised me. I mean, most people wouldn't think that. They seem like, because America sells them arms, but yes, they do. And I don't have it in front of me, but I remember when I looked, that was on my very first episode way back in 2022. But I know several of the countries that they had sold arms to were hostile. So that was surprising. And they also, I know they had sold arms to Ukraine, to some of the Azov battalion, I think even before the Ukraine-Russian war. But that sounds weird because Azov is known as kind of being anti-Semitic and kind of stems from this anti-Semitic fascist Bandera. But, even the Zionists, a couple of the Zionist leaders, like the one we mentioned, the Stern gang, Avram Stern, when they were doing those terrorist acts, he reached out to the Third Reich to try and work with them. He wanted them to basically kind of work with them to take the British down. And that's when they were bombing the Brits. And so people like him and people like Zev Jabotinsky, who I mentioned earlier, who was the leader of the revisionist movement. He wanted to work with the Third Reich at one time, the Nazis. So really strange stuff. And there's also, I should mention this too, there's the Ha'avara agreement that some people aren't familiar with. I'm kind of blanking on some of this information because it's been a few years, but it's basically the Zionists, the wealthy Zionists, they worked out a deal with the Nazis, and it was called the Ha'avara Agreement, where they could get some of their, well, a lot of them were industrialists, so they could get their products out without completely losing all their money. So the Germans would get a part of that money, but they could still sell their items and get that stuff out. And that went on for quite a long time. And some Zionists were against that, actually, but the people who were getting the money didn't mind too much about it. So
let's get into some of the spiritual implications of Zionism, starting with Kabbalah's influence on modern Judaism.
Yeah, so some people say Kabbalah, they like to say that Kabbalah goes back to, and they say this about everything. They say it goes back to Moses. God gave Moses the information about the Kabbalah when he went to meet him at the mountain and all that kind of stuff. And some even go back and say, no, God gave it to Adam in the garden. But really, from what is traceable, Kabbalah is really something that came out of the medieval times. And I think that they did bring some of the information from these other cultures that they had been in touch with over the many years. But it really came together in writing, and I think the 1300s. And they first tried to say that it was a 2nd century rabbi who wrote the main text, or the most popular text of the Kabbalah, which is called the Zohar. And they said it was this 2nd century rabbi, Shimon bar Yochai. But as people began to study it more, they found information in there that had come about many decades and centuries after this guy had died. So they figured out that it was the guy who kind of started presenting the Zohar to people, Moses de Leon, a Spanish rabbi. He wrote it and probably plagiarized other people, but it's not really traceable where he got all the information in it. And so that took off, and I think it was in the 1600s, I believe, maybe even late 1500s, probably late 1500s. There was a rabbi, Isaac Luria, who I mentioned earlier. And before that, Kabbalah was kind of hidden for the adepts, and you had to be about 40 to even study it. So they kind of kept everything under wraps, and only special people got to study it. And when Luria came out and kind of started studying it and kind of developed his Lurianic Kabbalah, the idea that when God created the world, it was created and there was too much light, too much power. And so there was these explosions of light, and the light just went all over the world, right? And so every Jew's job is to go and do good works, tikkun olam, and slowly it will put the light back together. And so they kind of believe that when you really start to delve into it, they kind of believe they're putting God back together, or making the world so that God can come back, that he needs them just as bad as they need him, or even worse, or even more so. So it's a really strange, it's a strange religion. And a lot of people say, well, that's just the fundamentalists, or that's just the Orthodox. And if you look into it, the revisionist Zionism did reject the Talmud and the Kabbalah, and it's the most popular Zionism. And it was created, I think it was created in Germany, but I could be wrong on that. But it's a relatively new sect of Judaism. And modern Reform, they do study the Kabbalah, and some don't believe that it was true, but they still study it for historic reasons or whatever. But some do. And one of the most popular authors actually is a Reform rabbi, Michael Laitman from Israel. So he writes many books about the Kabbalah, and there are others. There's Lawrence Kushner, another Reform author who writes about the Kabbalah, and even the conservative Judaism, which is even newer, which was created in, I think, New York. I'm blanking on that, but they study the Kabbalah now sometimes, not all of them, but some of them. And most of the Orthodox take aspects of the Kabbalah, and some believe it's absolutely legitimate, and others just believe that certain things are true, or they just study it for historic purposes. But I'll tell you quickly a kind of an idea about the Kabbalah. So in the Mishnah, that's one of the books that was written as part of the Talmud. It's not the Kabbalah. It was written before the Kabbalah, the Zohar, and all that. But they say in there that the Torah can have 60 meanings. But the Kabbalah changes that to every verse of the Torah can have endless meanings, 600,000 meanings. So it's pretty interesting when you look into it. They can interpret scripture any way they want. And so the Talmud is actually all these various rabbis' takes on what the first 5 books of the Bible mean. And then the Kabbalah is the same thing. They're commentaries basically on what they believe the Bible means, the first 5 books of Moses or whatever. And it's anything they want it to, really. I mean, it really is, man. Yeah. And if it can mean anything, then it doesn't mean anything. You know what I'm saying? Right. If you can mean anything, then what good is it? And I'm not saying it's not good. I'm not saying that. I'm saying
there seems to be a lot of mental gymnastics, a lot of workarounds, a lot of quote unquote fooling God in certain ways. Very strange. As far as the Talmudic Zionists, would you say the Chabad Lubavitch group aligns more with Talmudic beliefs?
They are both. They definitely believe in both. And they have a lot on their website, and I think it's just Chabad.org. They're pretty open about a lot of their beliefs. And their Talmudic and Kabbalistic beliefs. They write in quite a lot of detail about them. And that's another thing that if people want to start researching some of this stuff for themselves, a lot of it's just out there. They're not trying to hide it. It's just, a lot of it's not advertised. I mentioned the Jewish Virtual Library. That's a good source. The Jewish Encyclopedia is a great source. I mean, they just talk about their beliefs pretty open. And the Chabad is definitely into both, for sure. I mean,
where would you say the Synagogue of Satan falls into all of this?
Oh, that's a good question. People ask me that a lot, and it's hard for me to say. I mean, I feel like there's darker things that we don't know about, and I feel like that some of these groups are connected to it, but I can't prove it. But certainly I feel like some of the Kabbalistic stuff, when you start looking into it, they have this extreme version of dualism where there's almost no good and no evil. It's all the same. So I think that can be a real slippery slope when you believe that, and you may end up justifying horrible things, So I wish I could put my finger on it exactly, but I do feel like there's probably some of these guys who they're practicing some of this really dark stuff, and the Kabbalah is part of that.
It's interesting the mental gymnastics some Christians will do in blindly defending Israel and all the ideologies that have come out of the modern Christian biblical understandings of what the relationship with the Jews is supposed to be. Seeing that Catholicism and Christianity and the entire West is seen as the greatest enemy of Israel, it just boggles my mind to see how many Christians will just go to that blind support.
It is. It's so frustrating because, there's people who are otherwise good people who believe this stuff, but they don't understand any of the things that we've been talking about today. They literally don't know any of it. And I've talked to people who've went to seminary. I've talked to a couple of family members who have been lifelong Christians who have multiple doctorates, have went to church, pastor churches, different things like that. And I've tried to talk to them about the Talmud and the Kabbalah, and they have no idea about any of it. I have one of my best friends went to seminary, and he said, man, they never talked about any of this stuff whatsoever. So it's so much has been hidden. And I think a lot of these people, if they knew some of this stuff, I would have to think that they'd have a bit of a different idea about things.
Last few minutes that we have, what are your thoughts about everything unfolding now with the Iran war? There was a lot of information coming out that framed this as a prophetic war. We heard about the generals telling the soldiers they're fighting for Jesus, they're fighting to bring about the apocalypse. A lot of theological implications being thrown around surrounding this. We just had the ceasefire announcement today. Who knows how long this is going to last? It always seems like there's so much theater involved with these operations that it's hard to tell what's real and what's not and how things are going to unfold. But what are your thoughts about everything?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned earlier, it's like everything that happens in the Middle East, if it's concerning, especially Israel in any way, is seen as prophetic. They'll say it's prophetic, whether it is or not, and so it's hard to say. But, we know that these wars are for profit. They're for oil. They're for power. They're for taking land. And in my opinion, the Zionists, they want to take as much of the Middle East as they can, and they're using the U.S. mighty military to do it. And when they get as much as they think they can get out of the United States government and the military, then they're going to say, hey, this is our land. God gave it to us, and you have no biblical right, and you need to get out of the Middle East now. And so they're building an empire. That's what they're wanting to do. It's in this man-made worldly empire. And I think that Iran, we know Wesley Clark said all those years ago, I think, was it 7 countries in 5 years? I think is what he said way back after 9/11. And I think Iran was the last one on that list.
Yeah.
And so, this is a long held plan. And what I think is kind of funny, is we've been told that the deep state hates Trump so badly, but, this is one of the deep state's goals is to topple Iran. So, here he is helping to achieve one of the deep state's biggest goals and maybe possibly their kind of end big goal for the Middle East. And as this whole, this so-called ceasefire, we were being told a few weeks ago that Trump had created world peace, and now we're being told that again. But I saw before we went on today that Israel has continued to bomb Lebanon, which is on their list, even though there's a ceasefire. And the Iranians have actually said in their stipulations that you have to stop bombing Lebanon. Just leave them alone. That's part of, if you want a real ceasefire. And from what I can tell, despite what a lot of the American media is saying, I think that the Iranians, even though they've taken on damage, they're in a better place now than they were before because they control the Straits of Hormuz, a major trade route. And now they're justified in the eyes of a lot of the world in having nukes. And I think other countries have probably seen what's going on, and they realize, yeah, I think we need nukes too, because Israel can come after us and the United States can come after us too. And so I think that, one of the stipulations that the Iranians said is we want you to rebuild everything you've destroyed, which God knows how much that would cost. We went through that in Afghanistan and Iraq, just unbelievable amount of money. So I think this is going to come back to bite us in a huge way.
I would have to agree, man. We're in interesting times. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to leave the audience with before we close out? Any final thoughts?
Well, none that I can think of. I mean, just want to say that it doesn't mean that you hate somebody or you're anti-Semitic at all to talk about the things that we talked about today. This stuff is easily researched. And one of the reasons that I started looking into this was because when one of my grandmothers passed away, my brother said, hey, look, on the obituary, and I never knew her very well. Her last name, it was a Jewish name. And so we found out that, hey, we have some Jewish blood in us too. And so I started looking into this stuff. So I guess people would call me a self-hating Jew, even though I don't hate anyone. I just think that we have to stop this Zionist seizure of control. And so that's all that I'm trying to do. So thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you, brother, for the research and the amazing work. We'll definitely have to do this again. Before I let you go, though, remind the audience how they can get more of you.
Yeah, so you can find me on X or Instagram at _the Oddman Out. And the name of the podcast is just The Oddman Out. So check it out. It's on all the podcast platforms. I talk about what we've talked about today, but I have a lot of stuff about secret societies, the Fabian Society, Fabian socialism, and a whole lot of stuff about propaganda and psychological warfare that I think that everybody could really benefit from learning, because we're getting hit with stuff so much nowadays.
Yes, definitely, man. Oddman, thank you so much. Like I said, we'll do it again. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then. Hello, friends. I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators, allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners, of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today, and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, and Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order. Watch Doors of Perception now on Amazon Prime. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. Hello, friends. If you're looking to start your therapeutic microdosing journey, but don't know where to start, especially when looking for the highest quality ingredients, including nootropics, and what you'd expect from a true microdose capsule, check out our friends at Brainsupreme. They offer the absolute highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey knowing that you're getting top-notch ingredients. To find out more, visit their website using that link right in the description, and you can get 15% off your entire order. Watch Doors of Perception, now on Amazon Prime. Check out the incredible artwork of Johnny Larson, featured on the cover of the Forbidden documentary, and the book A Warning from History by Cory Hughes. Visit Johnny's Patreon, patreon.com/Johnny Larson, or click the link in the description and help support Johnny's work.